Chapter 1. In my previous life, I accidentally rescued Tong Nian, the kidnapped daughter of a wealthy man. I worked 4 jobs a day and took great pains to raise her into a pampered little princess. However, after she was found, she ordered no one to mention that shameful past. The old man of the Tong family saw that I had done a favor for the Tong family and asked me what I wanted. At that time, I naively said, I want to marry Nian Nian and take care of her for the rest of my life. But I didn't know that Tong Nian had fallen in love with the wealthy young man Lu Yunhui since the day she returned to the Tong family. After marriage, she was extremely cold to me, and even wiped my hand with a handkerchief immediately every time she held my hand. Later, she became pregnant. In order to avoid being branded as a heartless man, she wanted to be with him legitimately. Tong Nian pushed me off the building with her own hands. Before she died, she said to me nonchalantly, my first choice will always be Yunhui, and my backup choice can be anyone. Song Hui, how can you, a despicable poor man, be worthy of being my husband? When I opened my eyes again, I was back to the day when Mr. Tong asked me what I wanted. This time I put aside my wishful thinking and booked a flight to leave Jingzhou a week later. He said calmly to Mr. Tong, I want some money and then leave Jingzhou. Go find the life you want. 1. What? Are you really willing to give up Nian Nian? Hearing my answer, Mr. Tong frowned and looked surprised. Everyone knew how much I loved Tong Nian, and they all believed that I would do everything I could to make her marry me by using the fact that I saved her life as a condition. I actually did that in my last life. What they got in return was indifference, cold stares and even death. The pain of falling to the ground and being shattered is still very clear. Even the look of relief in Tong Nian's eyes when he pushed me down the stairs is still vivid in my mind. If I were to live my life over again, I wouldn't want to indulge in such wishful thinking again. I took a deep breath and looked at Mr. Tong with a calm smile. Tong Nian and I are very different in status. She deserves better. I also want to pursue my own life, please help me, Uncle Tong. Old Master Tong, who was sitting opposite, was silent for a long while before he sighed and nodded, you are right. The status difference between you and Nian Nian is too big. You are destined not to be happy. The Tong family is grateful to you for saving her life and working so hard to raise him well. I will give you any amount of money you want. He raised his eyes and looked at me, why, you don't have to leave Jingzhou. I will definitely pave the way for your future life. Hearing this, I smiled and shook my head, lowered my eyes and murmured, the sky is high and the birds fly freely. I also want to live a life that is not revolving around childhood thoughts. Uncle Tong, please don't tell her that I'm leaving. She has just taken over the company and is very busy. I don't want her to be distracted by these things. When we came out of the Tong family's old house, it was almost dark. As soon as I opened the car door, the phone in my pocket rang. I took it out and saw that it was Tong Nian calling. At this time in her previous life, she and Lu Yunhui had already expressed their feelings to each other. But I saved her life so that Mr. Tong forced her to marry me. She was so immersed in happiness after marriage that she didn't notice anything at all until I caught Tong Nian and Lu Yunhui kissing passionately. Then I realized that someone else had already lived in her heart. My thoughts flashed back and I pressed the answer button. But before he could open his mouth, Tong Nian's angry voice rang out from the other end of the line, Song Hui. I asked you to send a document over. Is the person dead? Look how long it has been. You can't even handle such a small matter. What use do I have for you? After she yelled at me, I remembered that I was supposed to deliver some documents to her. I took a breath and said, I forgot. If it were in the past, I would have apologized humbly for a long time and then quickly sent it to her. But now I suddenly don't want that anymore. Tong Nian on the other end of the phone was silent for a long time, as if he was unable to react. After a while. You can forget this, you have a stupid brain. Forget it. I'll be right back once dinner is ready. After saying this, Tong Nian hung up the phone without giving me any chance to speak. I stared at the disconnected interface, and I couldn't help feeling sad inside, with tears welling up in my eyes. The next second, I quickly opened the ticket booking software. Booked a flight abroad a week later. 2. 5 years ago, when I was living in a small county town, I accidentally rescued Tong Nian who was kidnapped and fell off a cliff. At that time, she was seriously injured and had forgotten everything and everyone. I spent all my money to save her. After I called the police, they told me that they couldn't find any information about Tong Nian's identity and asked me to take care of her first. I took care of her for 5 years. After Tong Nian recovered, he showed a completely different side of himself. Not only was he smart in doing things, but his face was also stunningly beautiful. People in the village joked with me, "Ah, why, you found yourself a wife." I was too dumb to refute, but I felt happy in my heart. As an orphan who grew up without a father or mother and lived in other people's homes, I don't know when my life started to change because of Tong Nian's appearance. I also gradually got used to her life around me. So I dropped out of school and started working 4 jobs every day to support Tong Nian's education. I gave her the best clothes and things to do, and in 5 years I raised her into a pampered little princess that everyone loved. Tong Nian is also very hardworking, and doing well in his studies is good for me too. She would secretly go to work because she felt sorry for my hard work, and then use the money she earned to buy me new clothes that I couldn't bear to buy. She would also come to my workplace to pick me up after work day after day in the cold winter. After 5 years of such mutual support, Tong Nian's family found her. It was then that I understood why the police couldn't find out her identity at the time, because she was the daughter of a wealthy and powerful family, and had been well protected by her family since she was a child, and no one was allowed to know her identity. The day we left the small county town, Tong Nian gently held my hand and said to me with a smile, "Ah, why, come with me. For the rest of my life, it's time for me to take care of you." When I opened the door, there was a dim light in the living room. Tong Nian was wearing an expensive little black dress that was custom-made at first glance. She sat on the sofa with a gloomy face. When she heard me open the door, she turned her head slowly and asked me in a voice that seemed to be icy, "Where have you been? Didn't I tell you to stay home?" I stood there and looked at her for a long time, then turned on the light without saying a word. I answered her question casually. Uncle Tong had something to ask me, so I went back to the old house. After that, I walked into the kitchen, skillfully put on an apron and started cooking. Tong Nian saw my cold attitude and immediately got furious and rushed into the kitchen. "Song, why? Are you going to make a scene? How do you talk to me?" I don't know when it started, but she always speaks to me with sarcasm. In my previous life, I just thought she was just upset because she had just taken over the company. But now I know that since I don't love you anymore, there is no need to be polite. A feeling of sadness spread in my heart. I took a deep breath, put down the knife in my hand, and turned to look at Tong Nian. "Then how do you want me to talk to you?" "Tong Nian, I don't owe you anything." Hearing this, she clenched her hands at her sides and glared at me with bloodshot eyes. She sneered, "You don't owe me. Song, why, if it weren't for me, would you be able to live in such a nice house and drive such a nice car? Don't forget, you were just an orphan from a small county town in the beginning. The more familiar you are with something, the better you know where it will hurt the most." My heart is broken into pieces, but I still have to hold back my tears. It was a long time before Tong Nian seemed to realize what she had said. She restrained her temper and was about to speak when her cell phone rang. As soon as I took the phone out of my pocket, I saw the words "Yun Hui" on the screen. Compared to the rage when she spoke to me, Tong Nian's tone when speaking to him could be described as gentle as water. "Don't worry, Hui. I'll come pick you up soon. Just sit in the car and don't move." Tong Nian said this as he anxiously left the kitchen without even glancing at me. It was not until the door was closed that I stumbled and fell onto the cold ground. Tears no longer flowed uncontrollably from my eyes. I sobbed and clutched the clothes on my left chest, whispering in pain, "Tong Nian, every time you called those 2 words, were you thinking of me, ah why, or him, ah why?" 3. Tong Nian did not go home that night. The next day I saw the picture of her being carried into the villa by Lu Yun on the hot search. Everyone said that wealthy daughter Tong Nian and wealthy young man Lu Yunhui were about to get married, and that this match made in heaven was finally going to happen. Yes, they are people from the same world. To Tong Nian, I was just an outsider who happened to save her life. It only took me 3 days to prepare the materials for studying abroad, and I also spent a lot of money to contact a learning institution to study abroad for a few years. Tong Nian is right. If it weren't for her, I would never have lived the life I have now, so we don't owe each other anything. Uncle Tong has been very nice to me since I came to Jingzhou. When I was leaving, I took such a large sum of money from him. I thought we would never see each other again, so I planned to buy him a small gift. As soon as I arrived at the tie shop and pushed the door open, I saw Tong Nian trying on a tie for Lu Yunhui. She was smiling as she carefully tried on his tie. Their eyes moved around each other, with an indescribable ambiguity. Just then, Tong Nian discovered me. Her smiling face suddenly turned gloomy, and she walked towards me with a frown. "You followed me?" My heart paused and I was about to explain. Unexpectedly, Lu Yunhui spoke before me, and took Tong Nian's hand affectionately. "This is Mr. Song, right? The one who saved Nian Nian." Seeing them like this, I really can't calm down. So the tone of the answer was inevitably a little extreme. "So what if it's me?" "Song Hui, watch your tone." As soon as I finished speaking, Tong Nian yelled. Hearing this, I looked at her and smiled indifferently. Did I say something wrong? Seeing this, Lu Yunhui hurried out to smooth things over. He smiled gently and tugged at the corner of Tong Nian's clothes. "Okay, Nian Nian, why do you have to be angry over such a lowly person like her?" He looked at me contemptuously and said, "Mr. Song, it seems that living in the Tong family for a few days has made you forget your identity. Don't forget, if you hadn't saved Nian Nian, you would never have the right to stand here and talk to me in this life." Everyone felt that it was my honor to save Tong Nian, even Tong Nian himself felt so. Thinking of this, I lowered my eyes and snorted coldly, saying in a flat tone, "If I could do it again, I would rather not have saved her." "Song Hui." Tong Nian roared, his eyes looked like he wanted to eat someone, and he gritted his teeth and said, "Say it again if you dare." I looked up at her, my vision blurred by tears, and I answered in a hoarse voice, "Tong Nian, if I could, I would rather not have saved you." This time she didn't say anything, but just looked at me for a long time with a complicated expression. Finally, he left here angrily. Seeing this, Lu Yunhui immediately wanted to follow him, but when he passed by me, he suddenly stopped and turned his head to look at me, smiling proudly. "By the way, I have some good news that I think I should share with Mr. Song. Nian Nian is pregnant." Just 5 short words made my blood freeze instantly. I didn't expect that something that happened a few years later in my previous life would actually happen earlier. Looking at my dazed look, Lu Yunhui curled his lips and smiled, then left with satisfaction. 4. The night before leaving, Tong Nian called me for the first time and said she wanted to talk to me about something. I thought she was going to tell me about her pregnancy, or that they were going to get married. But no matter what it is, it doesn't matter. When she came to see me, she saw the packed suitcase I had placed by the entrance. Tong Nian was stunned for a moment and asked me in confusion, "Where are you going?" I glanced at the suitcases calmly and lied to her for the first time. "Do you still remember Aunt Zhang who lived next door to us? She was sick and said she missed me very much and asked me to go back to see her. When are we leaving?" Tong Nian asked hurriedly. I was stunned for a moment, and subconsciously continued to lie, "Tomorrow night." Hearing this, Tong Nian nodded and said to himself, "Aunt Zhang used to take good care of me. I will go back with you tomorrow night to see her." I didn't answer. We didn't say anything and the atmosphere was eerily quiet. Finally, it was Tong Nian who broke the awkwardness. She looked at me several times as if she wanted to say something, and finally took out a velvet box from her pocket. The moment she opened it, a dazzling diamond ring as big as a pigeon egg came into view. My heart skipped a beat, but I couldn't help but think sadly, are she and Lu Yunhui really going to get married? "Does it look good?" Tong Nian asked. I came back to my senses when I heard this, and looked up at her. "Not bad." She stopped talking, pursed her lips, and looked a little lost. Why, I was indeed too irritable during this period and said a lot of hurtful things to you, but I really didn't mean it. Tong Nian suddenly began to apologize. I smiled faintly, thinking that she was quite decent. At least she knew to say sorry for everything she had done to me when we parted. "It's okay, it's all over," I replied indifferently. Tong Nian's eyes lit up when she heard that, and she grabbed my hand unexpectedly. "Really? You really won't be angry?" I didn't know why she suddenly acted like this, and when I was about to speak, the phone in my pocket vibrated. I pushed Tong Nian away, took it out and saw that it was a message from the real estate agent I had contacted before. "Mr. Song, the arrangement you made for me to rent a house has been completed. The landlord will contact you when you land. I turned off the screen and looked at Tong Nian again. This time we really have to say goodbye. So I took a deep breath and smiled at her for the first time in a long time. Well, I'm not angry. Hearing this, the child seemed to breathe a sigh of relief and wanted to hold my hand again, but this time I subconsciously took a step back. She noticed the subtle movement, and Tong Nian's smile froze visibly. Why, you really don't blame me. Actually, I've always had a lot to say to you. Tong Nian, let's talk after I come back. I interrupted her, feeling inexplicably tired. She opened her mouth, but finally nodded without saying anything. Yes, we have plenty of time. We can talk about it after we see Aunt Zhang and come back. I ordered her to leave on the grounds that I was sleepy and wanted to sleep. When she was about to leave, Tong Nian looked back at me every few steps. It was not until we reached the door that she pressed the ring into my hand and said, "Please keep it for me first. I'll pick you up after get off work tomorrow, and then we'll go back to see Aunt Zhang together." I looked at her with a smile without saying a word. The moment the door closed, I threw the ring into the trash can without hesitation. I dragged my suitcase and took my car keys and headed to the airport. This time, it's really over. Chapter 2.2. 5. 5 years later, the plane landed in Jingzhou. As soon as I walked out of the terminal, I saw from afar the pretty woman with a gentle smile leaning against a black Bentley on the side of the road. Obviously, Ji Tongbai also saw me. She waved at me and then strode towards me. "Long time no see, why?" Then I smiled and said, "It's rare that Director Ji comes to pick me up in person." Ji Tongbai didn't rush to answer, but took the luggage from my hand, and said as he asked me to get in the car, "Everyone is waiting for you, and they all look forward to meeting you, a late bloomer and great screenwriter." After leaving Jingzhou 5 years ago, I flew to the United States to study. I came into contact with the screenwriting industry by accident and became obsessed with it. From knowing nothing at the beginning to being able to write a good script independently and then to devoting myself to the position of screenwriter, it only took me 5 years to make a name for myself. Many people are curious about what abilities I, a screenwriter who started late, have. It just so happened that Ji Tongbai had a pretty good IP this time, and she contacted me and said she wanted to work together. Thinking of the help she had given me when I was abroad before, I returned to Jingzhou without thinking much. On the way to the welcoming banquet, I couldn't help but sigh as I looked out the window at the street scene gradually receding. I thought I would never return to this place, but I unexpectedly set foot there again. "How long do you plan to stay this time?" Ji Tongbai asked. I didn't think much about it and answered truthfully, "I'll leave after your movie is finished. The weather in Yunqing will be nice by then, so I'll go collect some folk songs or something." Hearing this, Ji Tang nodded in understanding, and we didn't say anything else. Soon they arrived at the place where she was holding a welcoming banquet. We went upstairs side by side, and as soon as we opened the door of the box, we saw our colleagues who had been waiting for a long time. What surprised me most was that I could actually meet Tong Nian here, whom I thought I would never see again in this life. Let me introduce you to everyone. This is the famous screenwriter Joke, and his Chinese name is Song Hui. As soon as Ji Tang finished speaking, there was applause in the box. Several people looked at me and couldn't help but discuss it quietly. I didn't expect such a famous screenwriter to be quite young. If you don't know him, you would think he is just a young boy. Don't say that. His abilities are obvious to all in the industry. I heard that director Ji took great pains to invite him back this time. I think their relationship is not ordinary. These discussions had no effect on me. I withdrew my gaze from Tong Nian and smiled at them calmly. "You can just call me Xiao Hui. Please take care of me in future cooperation." After saying that, Ji Tongbai asked me to sit down, but from the moment I entered the box, I felt a burning gaze, and it was obvious who it came from. As soon as I sat down, Ji Tongbai introduced Tong Nian to me. Hui, this is Mr. Tong Nian, the chief investor of the film." After she finished speaking, she looked at Tong Nian and said, "Mr. Tong, this is my good friend, Song Hui. I've never heard you say you have this friend before." Tong Nian's voice was low and hoarse, sounding a little unhappy. Hearing this, Ji Tongbai raised his eyebrows. After all, they are not ordinary friends. Besides, Hui doesn't live in Jingzhou, so it's normal that Mr. Tong has never met him. Not just ordinary friends. Tong Nian bit these words slowly and sneered. Seeing that the atmosphere was bad, everyone consciously shut up. I poured a full glass of wine, stood up suddenly and looked at Tong Nian. Mr. Tong, thank you for your investment in meeting the Green Mountains. Tang Bai and I have a very good relationship. This glass of wine is an advance wish for the movie to be a big hit. After saying this, I tilted my head back and drank the glass of liquor. Just this action made Ji Tongbai and Tong Nian, who were sitting in the seats, stand up at the same time and look at me with frowns. Before the wine in the glass was even empty, Ji Tongbai grabbed the glass and drank the rest in one gulp under everyone's surprised eyes. Then he turned his head and looked at me with a smile. How can your stomach be used to drink so much? Don't show off. A familiar scene rushed into my mind. The first time I met Ji Tongbai was 3 years ago when I was just starting out. It was also a social event like this. The director at the time insisted that I drink a whole glass of liquor. I hesitated for a long time and couldn't think of a reason to refuse, so I made up my mind and picked up the wine to drink. Unexpectedly, a slender and delicate hand snatched the wine from my hand in an instant, and before I could react, Ji Tongbai drank the glass of wine. Finally, he smiled and said to the director, "Don't make things difficult for the newcomers." 6. Ji Tongbai and I stared at each other in the air for a long time before I came back to my senses first. As a result, I met Tong Nian's expression, which was indescribable. She snorted coldly, raised her hands and began to applaud, and then spoke in a sarcastic tone, "Director Ji and Mr. Song really have an unusual relationship. They can even drink the same glass of wine together." Ji Tongbai was about to speak when he heard this, but I interrupted him first. "I just took a flight for more than 10 hours and I'm very tired. I'm sorry I can't stay with you for long today. Anyway, there will be plenty of opportunities to meet in the future. Everyone have fun tonight, I'll pay the bill." After saying this, I stood up and was about to leave without even glancing at Tong Nian. Seeing this, Ji Tongbai looked at me worriedly, approached me and asked, "Are you okay? I'll take you home." I shook my head. "No, I can go back by myself." "Can you find the place by yourself when you go back?" Ji Tongbai curled his lips and smiled. "Let's go, I'll go back and take care of some things as well." I didn't stay in Jingzhou for long this time and was originally planning to stay in a hotel, but Ji Tongbai said that she had several houses in the same community, which would be empty if not occupied, so she invited me to stay in her house. I refused several times, but she was very firm, so I stopped being shy and agreed. Ji Tongbai said hello to everyone present and took me away. Unexpectedly, as soon as we walked to the underground parking lot, Tong Nian called me from behind, "Song Huai, wait a minute." Ji Tongbai and I stopped at the same time. She subconsciously protected me behind her and smiled at Tong Nian. "Mr. Tong, do you have anything else to talk to Huai about? But it's quite late today. If you have anything to say, we can talk to the crew next time." But Tong Nian didn't listen to what he said at all. She walked around Ji Tongbai, grabbed my arm, and asked with red eyes, "Where have you been for the past 5 years? Do you know that back then?" "Mr. Tong, please respect yourself." I interrupted. Tong Nian broke free, and took a step back. Tong Nian's eyes flashed with surprise and sadness. She repeated my words in a hoarse voice, "Mr. Tong, please respect yourself. Song Huai, you never called me that before." I looked at her expressionlessly and replied indifferently, "You said it was in the past, it must be different from now. If you have nothing else, don't block my way. I'm going to go back and rest." Seeing that I was about to leave, she quickly grabbed me, and her tone suddenly became pitiful. "I don't want you to leave, Huai, I have a lot of things to ask you and say to you." This time, before I could answer, Ji Tongbai strode over and pulled away Tong Nian's hand that was holding mine. "Boss Tong, Huai is tired, please don't harass her. Let's talk about it next time. We are going home," Ji Tongbai said and was about to take me away. Tong Nian snorted coldly and looked at us sinisterly. "Are you going home? Are you living together?" Hearing this, Ji Tongbai nodded. "We do live in the same place. I don't care what happened between you and Huai, but he is very tired and needs to rest, so don't bother him anymore." After saying this, Ji Tongbai no longer gave Tong Nian any chance and took me away. On the way back, Ji Tongbai and I sat in the back seat. Neither of us spoke first, but I could feel that she had a lot to ask, so I told her the story of Tong Nian and I. The more she listened, the deeper her frown became. She and I are not boyfriend and girlfriend. We just supported each other and walked for a while. After saying this, I turned my head to look at Ji Tongbai and asked jokingly, but you just said that to Tong Nian, aren't you afraid that she will withdraw her investment? Ji Tongbai came back to his senses and smiled casually, why, I'm the one who doesn't want to continue the cooperation now. It's just a withdrawal of investment. I can feel it myself. I burst out laughing when I heard this. That's pretty cool, Director Ji. If she really withdraws her investment, don't blame me. Ji Tongbai smiled helplessly, reached out and rubbed my head fiercely. That won't do. Who else can I blame if I don't blame you? The atmosphere was far more joyful than I had imagined, and this was also how Ji Tongbai and I had gotten along in the 3 years since we met. It's so relaxing and I don't feel burdened. Ji Tongbai arranged my accommodation and even made the bed for me. I'll live upstairs. Just call me if you have any questions. The auntie has been cleaning this apartment, but she hasn't made the bed yet. I'll have someone clean it up tomorrow. Just as he finished speaking, the bed was made. Ji Tongbai turned around and smiled at me. Just stay here for one night. Looking at the well-kept room, I smiled and nodded. Okay, Director Ji, you've worked so hard to make my bed yourself. I'm really grateful. You're just a talker. After packing up everything, Ji Tongbai was about to go back to rest. After giving me instructions for a long time, she suddenly threw herself into my arms. I froze, my hands raised in the air, not daring to hug her. But she hugged me tighter, leaned on my chest and whispered, why, long time no see. 7. Soon I was involved in the filming of the movie, staying on the crew all day to study the script, and going home with Ji Tongbai after get off work. She is a good cook and she made me gain several pounds in just a few days. We were walking out side by side after work that day, and Ji Tongbai smiled and asked me, what are we having for dinner tonight? Didn't you want to eat sweet and sour pork ribs last time? That's enough, Ji Tongbai. Haven't you seen how fat I've gotten? Just as we were joking, Tong Nian suddenly jumped out from somewhere and blocked our way. In fact, she often came to the crew these days, and she always seemed to be hesitant to talk to me, but there was nothing I could do if I deliberately avoided her. Mr. Tong, if you are not confident about the filming progress and quality, you can withdraw your investment now. I will not charge you any penalty. Ji Tongbai said unhappily. But Tong Nian still ignored him, walked straight to me, and asked humbly, why, I want to invite you to dinner. I also have a lot to say to you. I knew that if I didn't agree, she would continue to pester me. So I sighed helplessly, nodded, and then looked at Ji Tongbai. You go back first, I'll talk to her. Why? Ji Tongbai opened his mouth to say something, but finally held back and said coldly, I'll wait for you to come back for dinner. After saying that, she glared at Tong Nian and walked away with big strides. I waited until Ji Tongbai's back completely disappeared before I looked at Tong Nian again. If you have anything to say, just talk to Mr. Tong here. But I don't think there's anything left to talk about between us. Facing my resolute attitude, Tong Nian raised the corners of his lips bitterly. You lied to me. You clearly promised me that you would have a good talk with me when you came back. But when I went to look for you that day, you had disappeared. I thought you went back to see Aunt Zhang without telling me, so I drove back to the county town for a day and a night to look for you, but Aunt Zhang said you didn't go back at all. Why, do you know how desperate I was at that moment? I looked at her painful expression, feeling nothing in my heart. I was even looking forward to whether Ji Tongbai would make sweet and sour pork ribs for me later. I don't know, and I don't want to know. Tong Nian, since you chose Lu Yunhui, I wish you all the best and that's why I chose to leave. I paused and shrugged. Besides, we have no relationship in the first place. Song Hui. Hearing this, she yelled, her eyes reddened beyond belief. You actually said we have nothing to do with each other. You saved me, you worked 4 jobs a day to support me, you made me miss you so much, and now you say that all this has nothing to do with you. Do you have a conscience? I couldn't help laughing when I heard this. I frowned and looked at Tong Nian in confusion. Shouldn't I be the one asking you this? Tong Nian, do you have a conscience? Have you really forgotten what you said to me? She was speechless after being asked back by me. She opened and closed her mouth anxiously several times before she said, why, whether you believe it or not, I really know I was wrong. I had a dream. In the dream, you used your life-saving grace to force my father to let me marry you. I was happy at first, until I met Lu Yunhui during the cooperation, and my relationship with him became very subtle. You misunderstood our relationship then. We drifted apart without knowing when. I gradually treated you badly and killed you. Later, I was overwhelmed with regret and developed a serious mental illness, and eventually committed suicide to sacrifice my life for you. But when I opened my eyes, I was back to 2 days before you left, so I tried my best to keep you. As she said this, she hurriedly took out a velvet box from her pocket, and inside it was the diamond ring that I lost that year. Tong Nian said anxiously, I originally imagined you proposing to me. I wanted to make up for the hurt I caused you in the past. But you left without saying goodbye. I have been looking for you for 5 years. Listening to what she said, my first reaction was that Tong Nian was also reborn. When I thought about it this way, I suddenly understood why she contacted me the night before I left, and why she suddenly seemed like a different person. I took a deep breath and said, but you are already pregnant. As the child's mother, do you really want to change the father at will? Why, I am innocent. Tong Nian interrupted me suddenly and explained hastily, I am not pregnant. I can swear on my life. That was just a lie Lu Yunhui made up to make you give up on your own initiative. Why, you believe me. Judging from Tong Nian's expression, she was not lying. But she did have feelings for Lu Yun in her previous life, but this time she was reborn before she had time to have anything to do with him. I suddenly felt a little dazed and felt that fate was playing tricks on me. But things have already happened. Since I decided to leave, I never thought of looking back, and now I don't plan to tell Tong Nian that I have been reborn. So I smiled coldly and said, it's a good story. But even so, we can't go back. Tong Nian, don't disturb my peaceful life anymore. After saying this, I turned around and was about to leave. Unexpectedly, she suddenly laughed twice, and then asked disappointedly, you are so indifferent to me, is it because of Ji Tongbai? I stopped when I heard that, but didn't look back. Even if it wasn't because of her, I would still be so indifferent to you because of others in the future. Because you have already lost the Song Hui who was so passionate about you. 8. As soon as I pushed the door open, I saw Ji Tongbai busy in the kitchen wearing an apron. The dinner she had prepared was already placed on the table. Hearing the noise, he turned around and smiled faintly at me, wash your hands and eat. I know that Ji Tongbai was angry because of what happened just now. So I walked into the kitchen and washed my hands for a long time beside her. Ji Tongbai didn't look at me from beginning to end and was still busy with the things in his hands. After washing my hands, I stood there and looked at her. She came to her senses and said to me, go out, there is a smell of oil smoke. Ji Tongbai, are you angry? The unexpected question made her stunned, and even her cooking stopped. After a while. Why, do I have the qualifications and status to be angry now? When she asked this question, she felt inexplicably sad. During the 3 years that I have known each other, Ji Tongbai has always been sunny and cheerful. I have also gained a lot of unexpected happiness from being with her in these 3 years. Our relationship has been quite ambiguous since a long time ago. But at that time I had to learn and live my own life, and she was also on her way, so we tacitly agreed not to mention it. It was not until this time that Ji Tongbai took the initiative to invite me back to Beijing to participate in the recording of Sea Spring. To be honest, I was timid at first when I heard her invitation, because I was afraid that we would just become ordinary friends in the future, but in the end, courage overcame timidity. I think I should come to her. So when Ji Tongbai had no idea how to react, I took a step forward, held her face with my hands, and leaned over to kiss her. Ji Tongbai, of course you are qualified. I could feel her body trembling slightly, and then becoming stiff. It was not until a long time later that she dropped the spatula in her hand, turned off the fire, and then hugged me tightly, stood on tiptoe, and deepened the kiss from shallow to deep. Ji Tongbai is much shorter than me, so I turned around and easily lifted her up to sit on the center island. She put one hand on my chest and the other around my neck. Ambiguous hormones exploded in the air, and we all gasped for breath like fish stranded on the beach. Even when I laid her on the soft mattress, I could still clearly see the lust that could not be concealed in Ji Tongbai's eyes under the dim light. I caressed her face as if I were peeking at a treasure, and finally bent down to give her a gentle kiss on the corner of her lips. She didn't answer directly, but raising her neck and kissing me again was the best answer. Noticing that I was awake, Ji Tongbai walked in her pajamas. From the moment she saw me, the smile on her face never stopped. She sat on the bed, leaned over and kissed me. Do you want to go back to sleep, or do you want to eat something? Eat something. I kissed her back, put on my clothes, and led her out of the bedroom. On the table was the food she had reheated, including the sweet and sour pork ribs that I had been craving for a long time. The happiness I feel at this moment is indescribable. 9. Since we confirmed our relationship, Ji Tongbai and I no longer hid the fact that we were together on the set, and soon everyone knew that we were in a relationship. Including Tong Nian. Why? Tell me what they said is all false. I was revising a script when she hastily pushed open the door of my lounge, and my inspiration was instantly cut short by her. A surge of anger rose in my heart for no reason. I put down the script and looked at Tong Nian with a frown. Hasn't anyone taught you to knock on the door before entering? Tong Nian didn't say anything, just looked at me silently, expecting me to clarify my relationship with Ji Tongbai. But she was disappointed. I looked up at him and said calmly, they are not talking nonsense. Ji Tongbai and I are indeed together. I will inform Mr. Tong when we get married. Can you come and be a member of the family then? My indifferent attitude completely angered Tong Nian. She rushed to me, pressed my shoulders tightly, and asked in panic and anger, are you still blaming me for what happened before? Are you still angry with me because of those things? But Lu Yunhui and I really have nothing to do with each other. Why, you are the only one I love from the beginning to the end. I will never forget that you saved my life, and I will never forget the 5 years we lived together in the small county town. We were the only ones in each other's lives. How did we become strangers? At the end of his speech, a hot tear fell on my face, and Tong Nian looked at my neck with empty and desperate eyes. There was a strange red color there. Her pupils suddenly constricted, and she raised her hand to rub the spot vigorously, but the spot only got redder and redder, and it didn't disappear. After Tong Nian realized what it was, he staggered and dropped his hands. You guys. I couldn't stand it any longer, so I pushed her away and stood up abruptly. Tong Nian, since returning to Jingzhou, you haven't allowed anyone to mention our past. I heard you tell your friends that those 5 years were the most shameful days of your life. Later, you and the people around you reminded me again and again that it was because I saved you that I was able to live the good life I have today. Don't forget what you said, I'm just an orphan from a small county town. Without you, I would never be who I am now. No. No. She wanted to refute, but she didn't know where to start. I took a deep breath and said a little tiredly, indeed, without the generosity of the Tong family, I would not have the life I have now. But I saved your life, so we're even. I don't want to be even with you. Tong Nian shouted, tears falling down her face, and took a step forward to hold my hand. Seeing this, I quickly took a step back. Don't come over. Tong Nian, I know the dream you were talking about is because you were reborn, because I am the same. Hearing this, she stopped abruptly and looked at me in disbelief. Because everything I experienced in my previous life and the tragic death scenes often appear in my dreams, I will never forget everything I really went through. God has given me a chance to be reborn. I don't want to be entangled in a meaningless and rotten relationship anymore. I am living a very good and happy life now. I hope to keep this happiness and not be disturbed by others. That's why I haven't told you about my rebirth. Now you know why I left you. I hope you can respect my decision. I took a deep breath and looked up at her. So, don't bother me anymore. In the end, Tong Nian left without saying anything. I think we will never meet again. But I never expected that I would hear the news of her suicide that night. I heard that when the doctor arrived at the scene, her body had already started to suffer from hypothermia. Tong Nian soaked herself in the bathtub. The cuts on her wrists were so deep that the bones were visible. It was obvious that she was determined to die. Fortunately, her servant discovered it in time and saved her life. Ji Tongbai asked me if I wanted to go see her. I was silent for a moment, then smiled and asked him, Director Ji is so generous. Then I might as well reconcile with Tong Nian and have 2 girlfriends. Hearing this, Ji Tongbai laughed and leaned closer into my arms. I am not generous. 10. Uncle Tong, please don't tell her that I'm leaving. She has just taken over the company and is very busy. I don't want her to be distracted by these things. Wedding child, because she said, we want everyone who knows us to witness our happiness. Some people will stab me deeply with my most sensitive past, while others will cherish my past and swear to be good to me all their lives. I don't know what kind of ending would be considered a happy one, but I think this is the best one. It's almost time for the ceremony. I sat in the lounge feeling a little nervous, adjusting my suit or hairstyle from time to time, when the cell phone on the table rang. I took it and saw that it was an unfamiliar phone number. Without thinking too much, I pressed the answer button, but there was a long silence on the other end of the receiver. Just when I thought it was a harassing call and was about to hang up, a hoarse and familiar voice sounded. It's a child's thought. Ah, why, I heard you are getting married today. After hearing my answer, Tong Nian was silent for a moment and then laughed. I always thought that I would be the one to marry you. Later, I did marry you, but I didn't know how to cherish you. You deserve to be lost. Ah, why, you said you didn't want to see me again, so even if I wanted to commit suicide to keep you, it would be useless. This is the first time you have been so cruel to me. Hearing this, I sighed. Tong Nian, I almost risked my life when I was good to you, so even if I hate you, I have a clear conscience. I know, so even if I am unwilling, I still choose to fulfill it. She said, restraining her smile and lowering her voice, at least Ji Tongbai is the one who can make you happy. It's just a pity that I can't see you walking towards happiness. From now on I will travel around the world, and every time I arrive at a place I will pray for you devoutly, wishing you peace and happiness. If one day you can no longer receive my blessing, perhaps I will really die in a foreign land. At this point, Tong Nian's tone was unprecedentedly calm, but without you by my side, dying in a foreign land is also the best destination. Finally he said, ah, why, I'm sorry. And, I love you. My memory was suddenly pulled back to the summer 10 years ago when I picked up Tong Nian. The girl was sitting next to me in a white dress, and we watched the orange sunset. Tong Nian suddenly turned his head to look at me and said to me, ah, why, I want to watch the sunset with you for the rest of my life. The wedding march started at the same time and I hung up the phone and put it on the table. Towards a new life.